Hello and welcome to Identerati Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. And today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to talk about, I'm going to be the Identerati getting the help today, and we're going to talk about Agama, which is a new domain-specific language we are developing at the Linux Foundation Janssen Project to make these web identity journeys more reusable and hopefully easier. And our guest today is Prabath Siriwardena, who's an identity software engineer at DevRev for developer revenue, DevRev. And he was a longtime engineer at WSO2 for 12 years, where he finished as Deputy CTO of Security. Welcome, Prabath.
Thanks, Mike, for having me. Thank you.
And we also have Dhaval Desai, who works for Glue, and he's the community manager for Janssen. Welcome, Dhaval.
Thanks, Mike, for having me. Hello, everyone.
So as I mentioned, this is a slightly different episode because normally the guest presents a topic and a title and homework. And but this week, I actually presented the topic because I wanted to talk to get more feedback about this identity low-code platform we're developing. And so my thought is that I'm going to present Agama to Prabath as if it were, some new technology that he's never heard of. And by the way, I don't think he's terribly familiar with it. And Prabath is going to be the skeptic and ask questions and provide context. And Dhaval is actually going to provide support because so he's actually deployed an Agama project for SMS. And also Dhaval is a better Agama programmer and more experienced than I am as the business guy. So he's going to keep me honest. So let's actually get started. Maybe it's easier to show, let's switch views here. And maybe it is easier to show sometimes than to explain. And actually, I'll kill the captions. And so just to start off, so this language is a programming language like any other, and we're developing it in the Janssen project at the Linux Foundation because we want a community governed project to steward this throughout the years. So it's not Agama is not a Janssen. Agama is not a Glue product. It's an open source programming language, just like Python or whatever. And you can find actually the documentation in the Janssen docs. You'll see a section for Agama, and that has the language reference and the other technical details about how Agama works, the execution rules, and also the project archive format. So like Java has WAR files or any other program might package, Agama also has like an archive format where you can zip up a project and deploy it. And so the goal of Agama actually has always been low code. So we wanted to build a low code platform that enabled developers to reuse existing projects from a catalog of existing projects. So the idea is we don't want developers to start from scratch. We want them to get a good running start. And, maybe they want an email flow or a social login flow or a passkey flow. So we want the developers to fork a project and then to do some last mile modifications. And we're doing this by leveraging GitHub extensively. So all the projects are published in GitHub. And you can fork them. So you can fork them into your personal or company repository. And we're using the releases section of GitHub. So we're just leveraging GitHub for everything it's worth, basically. And so after you've forked a project, you would basically go into Agama Lab and then load it from GitHub into your environment. And then you could open it up and look at it. So this flow and this first flow I wanted to start with, and then I'll take a break for questions and feedback. This first flow is basically a social login flow. So we have each flow has a name. We call it a qualified name. This could be the ACR values if you're sending an OpenID request. So how do you specify which flow you're invoking? And then in these flows, these are the Agama commands. And maybe at a later point, we'll actually show all the commands. There aren't that many of them. And this command basically triggers an OpenID flow. So we trigger a call to an OpenID provider. And then if it's successful, then we log it. And if it's not, we log it. But anyway, you can see the idea here is that we want to give you a way to pretty quickly map out either a series of web pages that you're rendering, or actually redirect you to an external identity provider, get a callback, and then start processing from there. So anyway, maybe I'll stop here. Prabath, any thoughts on this or questions before I go much deeper?
Yeah, Mike. Yeah, I mean, this is very interesting. Like one quick question came to my mind, like why you want to have a new programming language for this? You may have like very valid reason for that. Like why not like JavaScript? Like I've seen many like identity vendors, so they are building these flows based on JavaScript. Like any specific reason why you pick this route?
Yes, right. Good question. So Auth0 has something called actions, and you can make a pipeline of actions and achieve some of this type of functionality. I guess we wanted to build a low-code tool to help you. So working back from the actual business problem that we were looking to solve was reusability. And we felt that what we saw was that when developers customize these flows and then move to, let's say the next team comes in to take over from them, the developer team who takes over has to spend a long time looking at code. So we really felt that we wanted a more formalized low-code way to represent these flows that didn't involve the next team that comes in just staring at a bunch of code. And also we felt there was a business impedance mismatch between the business people don't want to look at code. And so it's hard to have a conversation with business people if you're saying, oh, well, look here at line 2. Then we also really wanted this visual representation of the code. And then why did we write a? So sorry,
Mike, if I
Dhaval,
can,
go on. Yeah.
yeah, sorry, if I can interrupt. I think it'll this point becomes much more clearer if we look at some of the constructs in Agama, like RFAC, right? So in all the auth flows, a lot of times you have the standard workflow where you redirect the client to some other identity provider. They call back to your OP again, right? So this entire loop, we have covered it within one construct called RFAC, right? So it takes multiple steps which are more technical rather than functional, and creates one functional step out of it, right? So this uh, you can call it an efficiency, or you can call it a simplicity, which Agama brings to the table, right?
Got it.
As a new language.
And how do you find like the learning curve or the friction for someone to learn a new programming language to do this? Like, uh, did you think about that too?
So actually, though we call it a new language, right? If you actually look at the documentation, you'll find uh, it's very similar to the languages like Java, right? It has simple constructs like if then else, right? It has the looping and iteration constructs also. So it maybe the wordings might change, but basic concept stays the same, and it is much simpler to learn Agama than anything else, right? So
And do you really
Well,
expect people
Let
to
me jump in there for 1 second, just say one thing about that. Prabath is right. It is a huge ask to ask developers to learn this programming language. And so I don't want to understate that. But we're aware that developers are asked to learn a lot of languages and that it's tough. But I think what Dhaval is saying is that this is a very tight interface between a certain set of functionality for login. Now, going back to your original question, we could have done this and just rendered JavaScript or rendered Python or rendered Java. And that was our initial approach, was to build a low-code engine that rendered basically regular code. But we found that what we needed to do is to define this tight interface between what the low code did and what the corresponding code did. And in a way, the Agama language is this very tight interface.
Right.
But I think you're right. Whether we'll be able to convince developers to learn this, that's the biggest question. We have to give them an incentive to do that. Yeah.
So you have nice like flow builder too, right? Like visual representation of this, and you call this low code, rather call it no code. So what's the expectation here? Do you like to get something up and running? Can, let's say, a PM, like a person, can he just only use a flow builder, flow designer, and do it, or do you expect them to code in Agama too?
Personally, I think that this is a developer tool for developers. So we're going to try to get people to do the trainings. We're putting up Agama Project of the Week. So we're expecting this to be like, I think about it like a WordPress plugin. It takes a developer is going to have to learn about WordPress plugins to write one of them.
Yeah.
So there is going to be some learning. Now, could you very quickly deploy? Actually, Dhaval and I were talking about how quick it is to deploy some of these. So you could go here, you could go to the releases section, wget this archive, deploy it, fill out your properties file, and have it up and running without having to modify any of the code. And then maybe go in and modify some of the forms and put in your branding. So but still, I don't think your project manager is going to actually do that. I'm realistic about this. I think it's going to be developers who do it.
Right. So one thing, Mike, like so mostly in the CIAM projects, like so, and before that, like so, what's the like? So this is deployed in the IDP, right? This Agama, the artifact that you are building.
Yes. Yes.
What is the entry point for that? Is does it need to be like OpenID Connect request, or can it be plugged into any API call in the middle?
No, the interface is OpenID Connect. Actually, you invoked an Agama flow by sending an ACR value, but this could be IDP specific. In our first implementation at Glue, we set the ACR value to Agama. So you signal to the IDP, I want an Agama flow. And then we were using an additional parameter called Agama_flow. And then you would give the qualified name of the flow. But it was always from an OpenID authentication request. And remember, this is web. It's just about front channel and web. So this isn't for back channel at all. I think OpenID makes sense here. Because we're always in web flows. Yeah, OpenID is basically what we're going to ask them to do. Yeah.
Right. So basically this like intercept the login authentication flow, right? So identity orchestration, like it also plays a role, like mostly where like PMs get involved, or during sign up flows too. Let's say like so most CIM is focusing on like nurturing like anonymous person to a lead, then to become a customer. So let's say someone chats from your like chat widget, right? So then it can go through some identity orchestration flow, see whether the user is in the user store, then call HubSpot or CRM.
Right.
Then like
Exactly.
during the sign up flow, based on some condition, like maybe for the 75% of users, ask for the mobile number and push some to analytics. So those kind of like orchestration flows, like useful in a sign up. But an Agama, to understand, it is mostly focusing on the authentication flow, right?
Actually, it's a very good point. I'm looking if do we have a registration? I think it's just in one of the other ones. But no, registration is firmly in the target here, because a registration flow is basically an authentication identity flow, right? You're providing your credentials. Now, you raise an interesting question about adding a user. So if this is a registration flow, it's a new user. So we might need to add that user to the database, to the CRM.
Right.
And each IDP is going to be different, by the way. How you add a user to WSO2 will be different than Glue or Keycloak.
Yeah.
And so we address this actually in the design of the packaging. And what we say is that there's some code that's not IDP specific, like how you render a page.
Yeah.
Those are free marker templates. That's the same. But if there's, because this is low code, what we're saying is that you should write implementation, you should write an interface for any IDP specific code, like add user.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the Agama project, you provide implementations. So there'll be a Janssen implementation, a Keycloak implementation, hopefully one day a WSO2 implementation. And there you provide your specific code.
Got it. Yeah. And if you look at the log, how do you call a small component? It's a modulo. How do you call it?
So we're calling, actually, each of these are called flows. So, a better example might be, Dhaval has another example with SMS authentication. Maybe, Dhaval, you want to show the flow for that one?
Yeah, sure.
And then the group of all this stuff together is called a project.
So small unit is called a flow?
Yes.
Log is a flow, right? Is it?
Yes. So, for example, in the SMS, we have a main flow that you enter into, and then that flow has like a send SMS flow and a password validate flow. So you'll see on the left, it's kind of hard to see, but he has three. I can full screen this. Oops.
And Mike, like people who are contributing to this one, like they are contributing with flows.
Yes. So, Prabath, to answer your question, if you can see my screen right now, I'm pointing to a particular flow, right?
Yeah.
So this entire thing, Agama SMS, if you look at this, Agama SMS is called a project. Now, within a project, you will have one or more flows. Okay. So flow is basically a functional segregation. Okay. We'll get to that. So in this one, we have three flows. One is this main flow, then you have this register flow, and you have this OTP flow, right? All three together will it creates an SMS OTP flow, right? Now, if I click on this, right, what you see on your right pane is that it's a flow, right? One particular this is called a block. Okay. So start block, assign block, call block, repeat block, and henceforth, right? Now, so each block has a specific task, and it pretty much represents the code in the Agama file. So entire flow is essentially this, right?
Yeah,
So this
make it
is
a little bigger.
the
Zoom in a little, Dhaval.
Yeah.
Right.
Control plus, I think.
Yes, hold on.
Yeah.
Can you see it now?
Yeah, that's better. I'm old.
Okay.
It's hard for me to see the little stuff.
So this is a flow, right? So it has a flow. This is the qualified name. Then if you can see, you have these kind of repeat constructs, right? So repeat 3 times max. Then RRF is a construct. Now RRF becomes a block in the editor, right? So if I close this,
RRF, I forget what it stands for. Read and render and read form or something. Read and I forget
Yes.
what the two
So
R's are.
repeat is a block, right?
Yeah.
Then this is the RRF. This basically renders a template.
Mm-hmm.
Given certain input, it renders a template, and whatever inputs are provided by the user, it fetches those,
Right.
right? So
Right.
it's RRF is render, reply, and fetch, right?
Okay.
So all three things put together, it creates one RRF, right? So
Right.
if I just show you more, RRF
Yeah, and
is,
that's pretty concise because in Java, if we had to
yes,
like display a form, process a form, like that would take us at least like probably 30 lines here. So we're doing all that in basically one line.
correct.
Nice.
So your login template would be mentioned over here as an argument to the RRF
Okay.
block, and the inputs to that template are here, correct? So these two together will build a particular entire HTML page which is presented to the user,
Right.
correct? Now whatever credentials that user puts in, they will be fetched back and put it into the credentials
Got it.
variable,
So,
right?
so the flows and blocks both are reusable, right?
Yes, both are reusable. So for example, if you look at,
So, for example, let's say this particular flow. So, can I like so flow is something like very like useful thing, right?
yes,
You get set of blocks together and create a flow, and can I publish it to your marketplace? Then someone else can
you
use that flow
yes,
in their
so you
project.
can share an entire project, okay? And
Okay.
project can have one particular flow. It can have n number of flows, 1 to n, right? So
Okay.
if your use case is within one flow, you can put it in a project and you can share that entire project, and that project is off the shelf. People can just take it, put in some property values which are particular to their deployment. For example, in this case, your SMS service provider
Okay.
is going to be different for everyone, right? So
Yeah.
that's a configuration value, okay?
So
So you
project
take
is the
this
shareable
project.
component, right? So sorry,
Wait,
project is the
sorry,
shareable
Prahat.
component, is it right?
It is, yes.
So
So
not
that's
the
what,
Okay, can I interject for one
sure,
second?
yeah,
So there's actually a couple of levels of sharing.
yeah.
Um, so let's say I fork a project from the catalog into my personal repo,
Mm-hmm.
and I can make a release in my personal repo
Yeah.
and with my changes, my form changes or my extra calls, right? And I can share that within my company.
Yeah.
And that this might be a public or a private repo because a company might not want to share publicly their changes.
Yeah.
But if I'm a vendor, maybe I'm an MFA vendor,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to make it easier for people to use my product,
Yeah.
then you can create sort of a sample project. This is how you use my MFA thing or my registration thing, whatever, and publish it to the marketplace. Now we review those. So in the IDE, you'll see release and publish as two different things you can do. Release means just build it in my repo. Publish means submit it to Glue, who's the governors of the Agama Lab marketplace, and then we review it for conformance. You have
Nice.
to have a license. The license doesn't have to be open source, but you must have a license.
Right.
The You must also, your README has to follow our style guide because we want some consistency across the READMEs. So when you go to a project, you know what are the flows and
Yeah.
what are the configuration variables, et cetera. And then we review. So we're doing some quality control on the marketplace, like I think a lot of vendors in our situation would do. So it's not a total open market; you can publish anything. But assuming you wrote a cool thing, we will not only will we publish it, we will also send you a T-shirt.
Nice.
So um, um,
Also, Mike, like,
anyway.
do you have like VS Code plugin to build in these flows, or do you always need to go to your console and do it?
That's a really good question. Right now, you have to go to the console.
Okay.
I was just looking at the VS Code plugin for Cedar,
It
and
would
they
be
can.
nice, yeah, like if you can do everything from VS Code and then just publish it to the server.
There's a lot of stuff that would be nice. So right
Yeah,
now, I think we're just happy we gave people a low-code
yeah,
tool, but I think building everything that we built in Agama Lab might be difficult. But
right.
maybe doing a syntax highlighting thing for VS Code to just parse Agama syntax. If you're geeky enough to just write the text of Agama, then that type of thing we could do in VS Code, I think. A syntax checker or something, right?
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then probably we can teach Copilot also to suggest different Agama constructs.
Yeah.
Maybe you can think of like publishing set of GSOC projects, like for the community can contribute to these things related to Agama.
Yeah. So in fact, so Agama Project of the Week. So we have this, and it hasn't been weekly, unfortunately. I think the weekly is very aspirational, but we are trying to take a project and then sort of give an introduction of it. We're also about to introduce an Agama training site, so that there'll be an intro to Agama, and we're using a WordPress plugin for that. And we're building a new site, learn.glue.org, finally, where you'll be able to do some training. Hopefully next week, we'll see the initial launch. And then after that, we're going to add the Agama course.
Right.
But
One more question, Mike. Like, so you mentioned that, like, so you want to make it like open standard, right? I mean, open spec, so the other IDPs can use this too. So what's your intention and objective of that? Like, why not? Like, why did you make this like just glue specific? Why you want to like make it like onboard other IDPs too?
yeah, well, so initially, the only two IDPs will be Keycloak and Janssen Auth Server. We're working on Keycloak right now. We're hoping to have that because Keycloak's the biggest open source, I think, IDP distribution. There's probably 100,000 Keycloak deployments. So what I can say is that it's the only orchestration format that will work in more than one IDP. So now, whether we can convince other IDPs or cloud providers to support this, I have no idea. Um, but the reason why I think actually open sourcing this makes sense is because um, um, when you want to build an ecosystem of third-party plugins, they want to make sure that they can actually use this in a wider range of deployments, and that they're not just developing something for a piece of enterprise software which is used by even 1,000 companies, but they really want a wide acceptance. And I think developers want a tool that they know that they can use. And if you're using it depends on you buying $100,000 piece of software, not many of your clients are going to be able to use it. So we felt that this technology, we would be more able to build a community if it was all open source than if it was proprietary.
Yeah, and also it'll help to some extent like reduce the vendor lock-in, because like even though like the communication with the IDP is open, let's say if you take Auth0 for example, like if you use the actions, so that's like we are logged in there. And if you heavily use actions, even if you take even WSO2 internally when you build connectors, even ForgeRock building connectors, like they have their own ways of building these orchestration flows, then like you get logged in. Like if there are multiple IDP supporting this one, then I don't know, maybe that's a reason they probably not support this too. Then they can switch between IDPs too. Like if it is
I
developed.
won't say the vendor, but when I told one vendor about this and I mentioned, oh, well, it'll be portable and customers will be able to migrate off,
Yeah,
they looked at me like I was crazy and they were like, why would
yeah,
we want that?
yeah,
So I think that will be one of the challenges, convincing people IDPs to adopt. Initially, we're going to just focus on Janssen and Keycloak. I think that's enough for us to get started with.
yeah.
And it's a tall, or I don't know if we'll be able to build this community. So that's why we're so heavily promoting. We're going to do trainings. Actually, we're in December. We're planning trainings in India, in Hyderabad and Bangalore, and we're really working on trying to catalyze this developer ecosystem. But it's going to be a challenge, I think.
Nice. Yeah, yeah.
The language is actually so small we could practically run through the whole language right now. I started to do this, and I think people will realize maybe it's not as much of an ask if you see we're only talking about like, I can give you the whole language overview and like, okay, so we have RRF, which is render page. We have assignment, obviously assign a variable. Call, this is call a method. And we're using Java and Groovy. So you can actually include that Java class or a jar file or the Groovy class directly in the project. So you can ship with the code that you're relying on. When this is like a iteration, log, repeat, iterate, these are all just basic programming constructs, finish. So the really important ones is 4 commands: RRF, render form, call a method, trigger another flow. We want to make these flows kind of atomic, so you don't have to repeat. So trigger is really important because you might actually trigger a flow from another project. So one interesting thing about this flow, so this is the flow for hello. Hello is an OpenID service for social login. And we wrote a flow to trigger hello, but it uses the OAuth authorization code with user info flow. So you can not only trigger a flow that's in your project, but you can trigger a flow in another project, because when the IDP loads the projects, all of the flows become available. Okay. So you could think of this almost like import. And so nobody has to rewrite OpenID. We already wrote it. All you need to do is trigger this OpenID flow, send in your parameters, and you'll get back a result. So in the configuration parameters, basically we give the client ID secret and the other OAuth information. And I think what I see is that actually you mentioned registration, but a lot of times social login is part of that registration flow. So companies need an easier way to basically trigger these social flows. And now in this one box, basically we can trigger, okay, authentication happens at hello, and I get back user info, and then I continue on my way. And maybe I display some more forms because hello only gives me like my Google ID, but I need the user's like last name and phone number, etc. So trigger is really important. And then RFAC is basically, trigger, in this case, that's redirect and fetch at callback. A lot of identity flows, you send the user's browser to the IDP, stuff happens, and then you get a callback at the end. Yeah. And so we've abstracted that into one block. So you can basically say, okay, this thing happens where you get redirected, you get a callback, and then you move on. So in the OpenID flow, we actually use RFAC. I think from an orchestration perspective, so Agama, it's not that bad. I think like we said, we're hoping the learning curve's not too much. And let me quickly show, I mentioned how you could release a project. Mm-hmm. So I could download a project right here. If I just want to download the file and then deploy it on my IDP, I could do that. But I'm going to create a release 0.0, or let's do 1.0.2 and release it. And now it's taking my project and it's building it, and it's going to, so if I go to my my project in GitHub, I will now see here's the asset that I built. So I can copy this link, and now let's say I want to deploy it. I can go to my my tool and start. This is the open source Janssen Project interface. It's called the TUI or Text UI. It's a little bit geeky. The commercial version has a web interface, but our open source project doesn't. Actually, I didn't get the project yet, so let me wget it on the server, and then go back to my TUI and upload it. And so it's in my root folder. And so basically I can take it and now it's deploying. But that idea that what we're giving you through this isn't just a way to build the software, but a way to release and to manage the release of the software so that you can I don't know, we're trying to put some more formalization around this whole developer process. Like what's the process at which um, let's see if it deployed okay. Yeah, and actually I'll show one more thing here. So now Dhaval mentioned that there could be configuration for the project. So let me export the sample configuration. We'll call it agama.json, or no, a better name would be hello.json. Okay, and now I'll go to my and oh, this is the OpenID one. Actually, let's take a look at the hello one.
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah.
One more thing that I wanted to kind of highlight is that the Gamma has all the web assets also, right? So all your web pages, HTML, images, branding, everything is within that. So you can customize it with your own branding and bundle it along with the .gamma.
Let's see. I think I did the wrong one. Anyway, yeah. So, well, let's just look at the. Basically, each project can have a JSON file where you have your properties. For example, I might have a specific client ID and secret, or where's the authorization endpoint. You know, all of this project-specific stuff gets you define it in your project, and then you can load it into your flow. Yeah, and as let me switch back to the Agama view. As Dhaval mentioned, we also have web authoring. So the form authoring is here. You can see what it looks like in mobile. So I think yeah. So you have basically your orchestration, your Java code, and your sort of web assets all in one place. So yeah, now I think that the deployment is not ideal. So some people would say, oh well, that's a lot of work to deploy your project. To me, it seems pretty easy. I get the thing and I deploy it, and then I set the properties. Like that doesn't seem like a huge burden to me. But some of the feedback we've gotten has been, well, nobody wants to like run their own IDP anymore. So we are working on delivering a developer hosted option of Janssen. And we're going to give credits for doing the training, so you can get some free time on a Janssen instance. But yeah, I think that's one of the key challenges. What are your thoughts on this? Is this just too much friction for developers?
No, I see like yeah. So one question, Mike, like how do we debug this? Like, do you support like remote debugging? Like most of these like workflows, the identity orchestration flows, the IDP offers,
Yeah,
debugging is a little hard. Like you need to put logs and then find the logs and do that. You cannot like connect. Like ideally, my expectation, like we try to do it WSO2. Like
yeah.
from VS Code, you connect to a server. So you have the orchestration flow running in your VS Code and do remote debugging. So do you like plan to support that kind of flows?
That's Dhaval. It's a good question. My impression is you're in log land and
Yeah.
gonna have to like print a lot of stuff. But
Yeah.
Dhaval, you've actually written more of these than I have. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts
so
on
I agree with Prabhat that yes, logging is the way we still debug. There is no remote debugger that you can connect.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's needed. I do agree. Right now, what we are dealing with are simpler flows, which are kind of which have a couple of conditionals and couple of iterations within them. But
Yeah.
if it grows more complicated and there is more logic in the flows, then the remote debugger will really come handy. Right now, it's the logs that we have.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And also, like, when you explain this, and I see this as like mini IDP too, this like Agama project. Like, can you like when you deploy this one, what function base functionality that you expect from the server? Do you expect like that? Do we need to have like OpenID Connect support in that server, or it can be just another web server that we can host this Agama project?
Hmm. Well, implementing the so there's actually in the project there's an Agama, we call it a transpiler. So it takes the Agama code and it makes it into Java code, and that's published in the Linux Foundation, the transpiler. If you'd had a Go platform or a Rust platform, you'd have to write a transpiler for that programming platform. So we just have a Java transpiler right now. We don't see web developers actually deploying these Agama. The normal way it's invoked is OpenID, but how the IDP decides to invoke this flow is totally up to the IDP.
Right.
Um, so,
So, Mike,
but
like one thing we see is like mostly for the SaaS apps, like SaaS apps, they not necessarily need an IDP. What they need is an identity bridge.
hmm,
Like, for example, even at DevRev, right? So
yes,
we use Auth0 as our IDP, but it is mostly acting as an identity bridge, which
correct.
which talks to customer IDPs or social IDPs, because we don't, like, as a SaaS vendor, we don't want to manage credentials.
Yes,
So we always rely on either email OTP or passwordless, or connect to their own IDP or social IDP. So it's an identity bridge. So Agama project itself could act as an identity bridge, right?
yeah.
Based on what you explained, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the critical use cases
Yeah,
is, what we might call discovery in the old days, IDP discovery.
yeah,
Um, but now, yes, you're displaying a NASCAR of different logos to socially log in. That might trigger one flow or another with different parameters. So yeah, this is very much a way to orchestrate your all the IDPs that you're relying on. Um, and some of those IDPs might have little differences. And so that's where we think, having the ability to add in some extra code. So maybe you take the hello code because you want to support hello as a social login source, but then you want to call the CRM. Like at Glue, we have like every other day I'm saying like add an API to call Zoho or something,
yeah,
so we have our business specific stuff. But yes, discovery and orchestration of external IDPs is actually the point, because you're right. Customers don't want to hold credentials, um, and so but orchestrating those external IDPs becomes challenging, and
yeah.
you could do it in the app. If you only have one app, maybe that orchestration is okay. But if you have to repeat that orchestration flow in a bunch of apps, that's really a pain.
Yeah, even with app, like if you, like, let's say you want to connect to multiple like custom IDPs, so they may support different protocols. Like, we need to think about claim transformation, those things too. So still that is little like burden for the app to do that. So having like identity bridge would be helpful in that way.
Yeah, yeah. Developers, I think, just want to get past identity and get onto
Yeah,
what their real work is.
yeah,
And we're hoping that these projects will give them more reusability and but also the level of control. Because I don't think that I wonder if this is going to be I see some very good orchestration SaaS providers out there,
yeah,
like Dscope in particular is doing a very good job in this B2B use case.
yeah,
Stitch has a B2B SaaS. So I don't think this is ever going to be sort of for the mass market. I think this is more of an enterprise tool because enterprises tend to have a lot of business specific and legacy stuff that they need to deal with to really get their identity. They're supporting Entra, they're supporting Google Identity, but they also have, you know, Active Directory, and they have this ADFS server from this company that they acquired. So I don't know if we're really the right fit for maybe that SaaS company who's building something really fast, and they just need to. They should probably use Auth0 or Dscope or something. So I think this is a little bit, but we'll see. You know, you release something like a programming language. Sometimes, like, we don't really know who's going to use it, I guess.
Yeah.
And this makes Keycloak, one of the weaknesses of Keycloak, in my opinion, is that while it's a very good out-of-the-box IDP, you can deploy it as a monolith, check a couple of buttons, and have like OTP authentication working, no problem. And so, in my opinion, the strength of Keycloak is that it gives a business good out-of-the-box functionality. The weakness is it's hard to customize it. And we actually think that Agama makes Keycloak a better IDP because it gives it that maybe more flexibility that people might need. But I guess we'll have to see. Now we're over time. So I want to give Dhaval, any last thoughts on before we close?
No, I think from this discussion, I'm taking a couple of good suggestions from Prabath. And I've made notes about that. So one is the debugging capabilities, right? That's really crucial. And the other thing is the identity bridge, right? And though Mike is saying that this is good for enterprise, I personally also believe that this is also good for smaller, simpler apps who don't need elaborate authentication. They can just use the off-the-shelf flows, right? So I think Agama Lab and Agama together serves the entire spectrum of the use cases, be it simpler out of the box needs, or it could be building your custom flows which can be maintained and kind of easy to understand for long period of time, right, without getting a vendor lock-in situation, right? So this, I think, we are catering to a broad spectrum in my view.
I hope so too. Prabath, I'm going to give you last words. Any thoughts you wanted to? And feel free to pitch DevRev here. I think revenues is something all developers need.
Yeah, I mean, this is a real nice project, and so I see a lot of potential in this project. And I mean, so multiple directions I see. Like if you want, you can take the enterprise too. But I see mostly like these are more developer. Like I mean, my view is it can be very like developer focused project for developers to use. Like if you build this VS Code integration, debugging capability, it'll be real nice to have. Yeah. So at DevRev, like we are building a developer focused CRM solution, basically to meet bridge developers, the gap between developers and Rev customers. So you will have your system of records in one place, both for customers and developers, so you can derive better insights. So that's what DevRev is doing. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure they're lucky to have you, and I'm sure it's going to be an exciting journey, and it sounds like you guys are building great stuff. So thanks so much, Prabath, for giving us feedback. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks Dhaval.
Thank you.
And next week we're gonna talk about we're gonna switch to national government as the topic and talk about the best ROI for national ID, the best infrastructure, the best design, and we have a guest from Bhutan and from Dominican Republic, and yeah, looking forward to that chat. So thanks guys, and thanks audience.